So welcome to our first leadership vlog, and welcome to
Vlog.
that's what it's called.
Vlog. F-L-O-G.
I'm going to keep this. Right, vlog. I can't say my F's and my V's very well. Right, you got your teeth in?
Well,
All right, cool. Okay, so welcome to our first leadership vlog. My name's Matt.
well, I'm Robert, commonly known as Bob.
So it's great to meet you all, and welcome to executivestar.com, and thank you for coming to our store. It's great to have you here, and our plan is to do a monthly vlog absolutely focused just on leadership to begin with. We speak and we'll discuss leadership topics because we both have a background in leadership. Personally, I've worked in the business world, mainly medical business, for over 20 years. Various roles. Started out as a sales representative, worked the way through to marketing, and then after marketing moved into like a regional manager role, which was fantastic and I really enjoyed. Then to different kinds of companies, working way up to kind of sales director, that kind of level, and obviously now managing a variety of online businesses as kind of managing director. So we will talk about leadership, but we're not pretending to be experts about leadership. What we really want to do is have some fun along the way, talk about some really important topics, give you some insights about our experience, and we'll bring in guests as we go through each month that can talk about their experience of leadership as well. And obviously it's a vlog, so you can comment, and we'd like an open forum for discussion. So that's the premise of our leadership vlog, and you're wondering who this chap is next to me, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Well, as I said, I'm Bob. My background is largely in education. At least I started out as a PE and English teacher longer ago than I care to remember. Went on to teach quite a few other things, as you tend to in the game once you're in it, as things happen, people ill, etc. But eventually became a head, and I've been a head of 4 different schools over about 28 years, I guess. And 2 of those schools were 2 state comprehensive secondary schools here in England. The other 2 were independent international schools overseas, and in those especially one has the remit to be responsible for quite a lot more than purely the educational process. For example, my last school employed even doctors, nurses, because it had a residential component, but caterers, gardeners, technicians, all kinds of people, over 500 in fact, adult workers in the school. But if you like, I'm limited by being mainly in education. Oh, a bit of football, a bit of what you call non-league football, and a lot of local, and got involved in coaching and managing at that level as well. And I wouldn't say that was irrelevant to the area of leadership.
No, absolutely. And I think that's exactly where we want to go. It's not just about big business leadership. It's about small business leadership. It's about educational and pupil and staff leadership. And all the way through life, you know, we will start by talking about the foundations of where did leadership come from. And our plan to do is to dissect it as we go through the months. So we'll pick, we'll maybe have a session one month on courage as a trait that is important within leadership, and just focus on talking about courage that particular month. Do we have a story, or are we coming to that?
Oh, well, we'll come to that, I'm sure. I'm sure you're very courageous in schools.
Yeah, absolutely. So it should be a wide open topic. It's not just about business leadership, but that's kind of my background and where the kind of ethos and thoughts came from to kind of kickstart this. So I'm really interested. We have a lot of discussions about a lot of philosophical things. So I started to think about where has leadership come from? Where did it begin? where did it get labelled, and how has it got to where it is? And the reason I started thinking about it was the the US elections that had just happened, and you know, everything that's involved in that and how bizarre it's been, but how fundamentally we follow leaders. We put leaders in situ, and at all different kinds of level. We all look up to certain people and are willing to follow them. So it's a strange concept that I was thinking about the other night. So philosophically,
oh boy,
educate me about where leadership began.
Well, I would have to put it very simply and crudely, and sort of point to sort of the involvement of man into small communities. I guess as large families, maybe extended families, if that's what they were called at the time, began to get together and work in groups or small communities. I guess some natural leadership occurred as people took the lead in organizing this and that, and maybe for protection or for cultivating as a group. One can see that in those circumstances, early leaders would have emerged. Then as those communities grew and became villages and cities and eventually states, came the need for more organization to look after these groups, largely for protection in the early days, I guess. But then the philosophers themselves in the sort of just after the late Middle Ages, as they emerged and began to discuss these things, held the view that man was either essentially bad or essentially good, maybe. And a lot of people thought somewhere in between. But at any rate, organization of what were becoming much bigger territories like states and countries needed government of some kind, perhaps to protect the most vulnerable especially, and it seems to me that that's how the whole thing developed. It's a vast discussion if you want to go into like modern elections and what motivated people there. That's a real minefield.
Yeah.
But I think you can easily see how it would be that as companies developed, the commercial dimension to life developed, leaders also made themselves known and rose to the surface to either create commercial opportunities and I guess it's easy to see the transfer of that kind of activity into modern day business organization. That's where leaders probably came from.
And it's, you know, a business gets a kind of a process, something that's happening, and over time develops it and takes it apart, and then can train people in various qualities to do certain things. And leadership is one that you know, I've worked for some amazing companies and been on lots of courses which talk you through how to be a leader, the traits that you should exhibit, those kind of things. So I think that's what business does very well. In education, I mean, if you think back about your history, your past, when you were coming through from starting from being a PE teacher, were you taught leadership to get to where you are?
No, if one ever becomes a leader, I think you bring the scars with you. You sort of get into the position and learn along the way. It was interesting you mentioned courage earlier, because I think that's a very important one. In fact, I watched a few other vlogs about leadership, and they were all embedded in like modern leadership theory.
Yeah.
And that's fine because it's based in practice somewhere, somehow. But it made me reflect on what qualities, attributes, skills, whatever you want to call them, got me through or I leaned on to do the jobs that I had to do. And in fact, strangely enough, when other people ask me what qualities you need to be a head teacher, I put courage number one.
Okay.
One example that you would find humorous
There's been many.
is the fact that one day I was in my headmaster's office in a school which had better remain nameless, when an old battered Ford Cortina came flying through the gate, screamed to a halt outside my office. Two guys got out, and one had got a machete and the other one a broom handle, of all things. And I knew they were coming for me. And they dashed through an outer office, through the middle of secretaries and goodness knows who, straight into my office. To which I said, "Do come in, Mr. Brown." I'll call him Mr. Brown. Tea or coffee? As it happened, he stopped and said, "I'll have coffee." Now, that's an extreme example. However, I learned that on a head teacher's training course in Middlesbrough,
Okay.
where a bunch of seasoned heads had us taking part in little acts and things. Of course, it wasn't meant to stop somebody with a machete, but it was meant to take the sting out of an immediate problem of that sort. So that's one example of courage and one type of courage.
Yeah.
I won't say that I had all the courage in the world. I mean, I wasn't by no means certain what the outcome of this was going to be. But in fact, after I explained to the guy what his son had been up to, he grabbed his weapons to run off and deal with somebody else. So you can learn elements of these things. I don't know that I would have had that response had I not experienced that bit of training. But if you go into other industries and businesses, the kind of courage you need mainly is the courage to deal with difficult people in many instances and difficult situations that arise. And it may be that you need a lot of experience to reach the levels that you actually need. So are there any shortcuts to experience? I just mentioned one, a training course that I actually attended and found helpful. But we'll return in subsequent vlogs, I think, to the topic of courage, because it's top of my list.
Yeah. And like you said, that the experience kind of comes on the job, doesn't it? You have to have a certain set of traits to step into a leadership position to be successful. But experience is something that can only come with time. But I suppose you can prepare for it with knowledge. I mean, have there been ways that when you've moved from a position into a more senior leadership position that you've tried to prepare for that?
Yes, there is no substituting away for experience. For example, I remember the first difficult thing I had to deal with, which was defending a teacher who was bordering on the indefensible,
Right.
in an open forum discussing him. And I got so worked up beforehand, it was a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
After it, the benefit was the next time I had to do anything like it, it was easier.
Yeah.
However, what we have to beware of are things like this. I once had a reference on a gentleman which said this man has had 16 times 1 year's experience.
I love that.
In other words, he hadn't learned anything, or he's learned very little. So that's not very useful either if you are not learning as you go along. And another of the 5 or so principles that I believe is vitally important for leadership is the ability to keep on learning.
Yeah.
However, I also believe, and this was based in some work I did at Sheffield University years ago on a master's degree course, that people are not likely to change unless they themselves see the need for change. So you have to give them a mirror, some kind of insight that's not just somebody else's opinion. They have to be able to see for themselves.
Yeah.
In a teaching situation, that can be empowered by things like video filming lessons.
Yeah. Okay.
But one of the best things I ever did was to appoint people who I called mentors, who had the time and the space to talk to, in my case, teachers, about their performance. And that led to videoing. And when they saw themselves, it's a much more powerful motivation for change.
Yeah.
Very often we put on courses and people think, oh yeah, that's quite good, and they forgot all about it the next day. But if they can see themselves in some way or other, and I know a lot of this takes part in the commercial world these days,
Yeah.
but I think it's an important element that they have to decide that they need to change, if they need to change, and make some development for themselves.
I completely agree with that. And I think it also can help you manage those people better, because that self-awareness, like you quite rightly said, it's in business, in sales you'll do video role playing, in presentation videos, so you're watching yourself back consistently. And I always found it personally very important for me to develop myself, because you do grow that self-awareness. You do see that you're not perfect. You are watching the videos with team members, people that are better than you, so you're learning from them. It humbles you to a level, and I think that level of humbleization, I've just made up a word, but it levels the playing field in your team, I think, by doing that. And it also gives respect to people that might not have had that respect before. So I think it plays a dual role of self-awareness in helping you get better, but also helping you manage your teams in that respect. Okay, so we've got courage, we talked about experience. We shall take these apart and just focus on one in some of the upcoming monthly vlogs. But as a general overview, what else is important, do you think, as a leader?
I think prioritizing is a biggie.
Okay.
It's absolutely huge, especially if you are managing in a large organization. Now, obviously, when you run a big organization, you have to make sure your middle managers, in fact, anybody who has a position of responsibility, is also doing a good job and carries maybe some of these principles with them.
Yeah.
But as the chief, if that's what you are, you need to be involved in that as well. And what helps more than anything else is to have a clear target or vision for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
In the school situation, I have on 2 occasions when I've met my new body of teachers, given them an overhead transparency which had students right in the middle, teachers around them, then everything else that was part of the school activities arrowed in towards them. And I declared that I would measure everything on the outside to the extent that they contributed to quality in the middle. Brilliant. And then if I found things were lacking, like the information technology setup or the board even, I once asked the board of governors in one of the schools I was at, what did they think would happen if they never met again? Now, okay, I was a bit out there, but it caused a bit of introspection.
Yeah,
I must say. So prioritizing, and another little story there is I was tutored to a certain extent by a lovely old fellow in a school that I was a teacher.
Was he a head?
He was a deputy. He became deputy head. He'd been head of maths and reluctantly became deputy head.
Okay.
Because he didn't really want to be. But I learned so much from him. And one week he said to me in his Derbyshire dialect, which is the same as mine actually, but his was a bit broader. So, what's that doing running around solving all these bee problems? He said, why don't you just leave things in your in tray for a week and see how many of them are issues by the end of the week? So I took his advice and did it and found that half of them had gone away. This guy had a great deal to offer. He was very wise. And that's one of the ways in which you can gain some experience, provided you're prepared to learn.
Yeah.
I thought I was the bee's knees, running around and dealing, problem comes in, 10 minutes later I've solved it, or made it worse by bothering to solve it, when many problems solve themselves.
Yeah.
So prioritizing is another area we should look at, because it really is a biggie. A lot of people drown under the work that they've created.
I can completely understand that, especially in the business world, because in the business world, you can live by, and your whole life can be answering emails. It becomes your whole life. You're getting hundreds of emails every day. And you're right, you can live in a world of, oh, I have to answer every single one and deal with every one of these.
Yeah.
Or I can sit on some of these for a few days and I can actually see whether the people that were meant to deal with these or take some responsibility will actually step up and do that. And I think when you first move into that kind of senior role, it's difficult to do that without having had the advice, because that's not advice you will tend to get told at a business leadership.
Well, you've just reminded me, one of the key things that this old gentleman I mentioned before told me was, when something drops on your desk, ask yourself, whose job is this?
Yeah.
And that's great advice.
Yeah.
Because it stops you following through on every little thing that comes through. You say, well, actually, this is the job of my head of HR or head of IT or whatever.
Yeah.
And take it to them and get them to do it.
Yeah.
And it has bigger spin-offs too, because they'll quite like their own responsibility. They don't like some flashy guy taking it off them.
Yeah.
So that's very important as well.
So because this is our first one, and we're talking generally about leadership in the first one, let's swing it around from business and education. Let's talk about football leadership, right? So you've known and worked under some interesting leaders within football, and give us a little bit of background about probably the most interesting leader that you've followed in the football world or respected.
Yes. Well, I did have the, I don't know if I call it pleasure or not, of knowing Brian Clough a little bit in my failed days in football. But the non-league team I played for a while, Belper Town, was a bit of a nursery for Derby County. So I met Brian a few times over that. And I don't know how you would really describe his approach to things, except that he was immensely successful, of course.
Yeah.
One of his things when he was in the mood was to keep people on their toes. He used to say they should never know what's going to come next. And I remember, for example, Kevin Hector, I think it was, put on the transfer list on Friday, not understanding why, scoring 2 against Liverpool on Saturday and being taken off the list on Monday. This kind of thing he was an expert at. Psychology is, I don't know that I would want to recommend all of the psychology that he applied, except to say in the context in which he worked, most of his moves were successful, especially when he was the manager of Derby County and then Nottingham Forest. And sadly, he didn't go on because of his illness in the end. But yeah, and I've met a lot of other characters in the football world, but I daren't tell most of the stories.
Well, I'm sure we'll
that
get
I
to
could. But, there was something in the psychology approach, and if you feel your workforce needs a bit of a G-up, throwing something in to sort of scatter the hens is not a bad idea.
And yet, I heard a story about Cloughy. I think it's just something that everybody knows, but his interaction at everybody within the club. So he wasn't just the manager of the football team, right? But he was friends and a leader to the ladies that cleans
that's
kit
right.
and all this kind of thing. It was throughout, and that's, I think, when you take a step back and think about leaders that you completely respect, and Brian Clough is one that people respect, and his legacy will go on because people know that he had a warm heart, a nice nature, and it wasn't just about the football team, it was about more than that.
That's an extremely good point, because I remember taking a group of youngsters from my school in North Derbyshire to Nottingham Forest when he was there. We didn't know whether we'd meet him or not. It was during the week and we were taking trips all over the place, and that was one of them. But we were told he were there and that he'd like to meet us. But we had to wait because he was taking his turn in cleaning out the toilets.
Really?
Yeah. That's what he was doing that morning.
Mm.
Then he came sailing in his scruffy old jumper, whistling, and great with the kids.
Yeah.
But to extrapolate that, I think bosses or leaders who are prepared to get their hands dirty or are prepared to do a bit of what everyone else does so that the others know that they know what they're talking about. There's contrary beliefs about this kind of approach. I know in the business world there can be the view that it's good to go in blind and make assessments because you're not clouded with, and I can understand that, particularly if you're taking over a place. But I always worked on the principle of getting to know all my staff, all my students in the schools that I worked on, and everybody else who worked for the school, and sharing how valuable they actually are. Because the truth is, quality depends on all of them doing a good job. So I think there's a message in that as well.
Well, and I think you're right. You have to understand the environment that you're working in, and like you said, there are businesses. I worked for an amazing business for a number of years, and the philosophy behind it was because it had lots of different divisions within it, and different kinds of businesses within it, that if you were good and you had potential, then 2-3 years maximum, and then you would be moved into a different division. Because you would bring fresh eyes, innovation into that particular role. And that was thought as a good thing, but that was a company that thrived on innovation. Its product portfolio grew because of different people coming in and saying, well, why don't we try this with this particular product and doing it that way? So maybe that is unique, because personally I've found that I'm not comfortable in a leadership position unless I know the ins and outs of it and I can talk about it. And just being able to talk top line is not good enough. I don't feel comfortable enough in a position like that to do it.
No. And I'm sure you can reap the benefits of being known by your workforce, whatever they are.
Yeah, and that's about that, and it brings into point another really important part of leadership, which is building the team around you. Right? It's about filling your gaps with amazing people that are better than you at that particular role.
A head teacher who I once worked for said to me, our job is to go out and find people who are better than we are.
Yeah.
And I never forgot that. And he did that. And this was in a sort of not very promising mining territory. And we had a great school. We had some terrific teachers there because that's what he believed in. He went out and got the people who he knew would be able to relate to those kids. And the results went up and up.
And you know what?
So he shouldn't be frightened of being overshadowed by able people who you're at point. You need a pat on the back for that.
Yeah. And I agree. And it's not just the people that are at your level or working alongside you. If you've got people, members of your team that you're managing that are very good at certain aspects of the team, then I always found joy really in bringing, giving them the opportunity to take a small leadership role in that particular specialism within the team and to run a team session on it. And you could see how much they thrive from it and made them grow as a person. And I think that probably reflects because of how I was managed by a fantastic leader that saw potential in me and gave me the forum to do that kind of thing, and it changes your life. Okay, well, I think for our first vlog we've covered quite a lot. I think what we'll do is focus this down, put this one out there and get some feedback from you guys. So if there are particular topics that you're interested in to hear about at an early stage, let us know and we'll cover those off. I think for the next one, we're going to talk about courage and experience as the main points.
maybe something to think about on that last point, experience, because I think experience cuts across all the other things we talked about.
Yeah, you're right.
Everything else depends on it, so we need shortcuts into it if we can. When I left my last headship job, I turned to the guy who was replacing me, who'd worked for me for 5 or 6 years, very good he was, and I said to him, well, you're a lot smarter than I am, but I can't give you 48 years worth of experience.
Yeah.
And he was sending emails and on the phone every other day. In some senses, there's no substitute.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are some shortcuts, like the old guy who I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
can help. So that whole area is very important, learning from others and being prepared to never stop learning. In fact, as I left the last full-time job, I turned to my wife and said, you know what? I think I'm about ready to start now.
Yes.
And in some senses, I wish I could. I wish I could go back and take another school with all that experience. I ended up doing things far differently to how I did them when I started.
Yeah.
In that leadership role.
Yeah. And that's how we develop. And you're absolutely right. If we all think back to the way that we've done things in the past, you always feel like you're an expert when you're talking about it in hindsight about your old job.
When you're young, then flying.
But we're all learning. So we hope you will join in, share your insights with us, and we'll continue to do this and bring in guests. So thank you for joining us on our first vlog, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye.